Hey, welcome. It's Wednesday, which means it's Zoom Live. And so glad to have you, Rodney, and Teresa joining me tonight. And for those of you who are going to be watching this recording later this week, welcome to you as well. Just to pick up where we left off just a little bit from last week, it was great. I didn't experience any technical issues on my end with assignments, which is nice. I can say that that's a first. So it's great. Your assignments came through perfectly clear, and I know it can be a bit challenging or frustrating to work with PDF files, but you guys seem to handle it really well. So really, really appreciate all of your effort and your hard work on that. Any Rodney or Teresa, any questions, comments, or clarifications from last week before we jump into this week's worksheets?
Yes. What is the Jubilee? What does that stand for, or whatever?
Are you referencing a specific page from the textbook or from the Bible? Tell me a little bit more.
Uh, it just, well, first time I pretty much heard about it was reading it in textbook where they mention uh, the Jubilee is kind of like a celebration or taxing or
Mm-hmm.
taxations or something. I've never heard of it before.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question, and um, let me pull up my Bible really quick. And so just give me a moment to get online and get there. Okay. So let me share this with you. So the question really is, what is the year of Jubilee? And what's being talked about here, as it's mentioned in the textbook. And so one of the things that we talk about a little bit in this course, it's not, again, this course isn't meant to be comprehensive. We're not studying the various books of the Bible in great detail. So we aren't able to spend a lot of time on some things, and we skip over a whole lot of others in order to just really just wrap our minds around the overall narrative of the Old Testament, again centered around five major biblical figures that are outlined in the course textbook. But one of the things that you can't deny is the significance of the Sabbath in the biblical text. And it begins, of course, in Genesis chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, the Lord creates a day of rest. And on that day, he rests from all the work that he had done. And that really is the foundation then for Sabbath for the Israelites and the Jewish people from that point forward. And the significance, of course, of the Sabbath is that today we would call it Friday. Friday sundown to Saturday sundown is a time of no work. And it's a time of rest and relaxation, restoration, as well as worship. And then we encounter a year that's called Jubilee. In Leviticus, then chapter 25, which you should be able to see on my screen, talks about a Sabbath year, but also the year of Jubilee, like in verse 8, which just really, I'm just going to read it. It says, "Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7th Sabbath year amounts to a period of 49 years." So every 49 years, there's this thing to be called, there's something to be called Jubilee. And then it goes on to describe what happens in Jubilee. We see that debts are erased in Jubilee. Land is returned to its original owners in Jubilee. and that you see that in verse 10 right here. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It will be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. There's also this idea that you don't plant, you don't sow, you don't reap what grows in your fields. You leave them untended for an entire season that year. Of course, the idea then is that what is grown, what is produced, is distributed amongst those who need it. And it goes on. The entire chapter really is about the year of Jubilee. So, so that's a great question, and it's really I don't know how to quite couch it in the language when we talk about redemption in this course, but there is a connection to those, of course, to Sabbath and to restoration or redemption, in the sense that, if anything, again, trusting in the Lord's provision for your life, enough so that you can literally take a day off, right? And so that's a really, I don't know if that's a difficult concept for everyone to grasp, really, but I do know plenty of people who work 7 days a week, and I don't know that that's healthy, even just from a purely health perspective, not even a religious or spiritual one. Working 7 days a week, week in and week out, without an intentional period of rest, or a day off, isn't a good thing for your body. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful. There's a lot of information. I know you're a researcher, based on what I read in your reflection from last week. Just doing a little bit of extra research, you come across a lot of information about the year of Jubilee, and so feel free to share anything that you come across.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that helps. At least I know where to go look, and
yeah, absolutely,
read about it now. I mean,
yep.
Okay.
Any other questions or clarifications from last week?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Well, I promise you, you probably have started to encounter a little bit. We're going to get to some of the fun and quirky stuff, like the Nephilim, here pretty soon. So sit tight. I promise we'll get there, and
Okay.
it will be interesting. So,
yeah. Well, I read your comments.
Okay. So this week we are in chapter 2 in the textbook, and here eventually we'll pick up the pace and read 2 chapters at a time, but kind of easing into it still. And this week we're talking about real time and real space, the geography of the land, as well as the historical time periods or eras in which these stories are couched or taking place in. And so I'm gonna share my screen with you again as soon as I download this. All right. And here we go. All right. Here's our worksheet, and here we go. I'm gonna get to the right page. And first biblical figure that Richter talks about in chapter 2 is Adam. In what years did Adam live? Okay, so not looking for here how long Adam lived, because that's well, if you do the math, it's just a little over 900 years. But that's not what the question is really asking. Is approximately what years did Adam live? And so there's a couple of different thoughts on this in biblical scholarship, and the answer is really up to you and sort of where you land in this. But you feel free to talk about the various ways in which we can try to date Adam, and so when talking about Adam, we're looking at pages 49 and it goes on and on and on through 52. But on page 149, really, the author points out that there's a lot of difficulty in dating the origin of humanity, Adam and Eve, and so says at the very bottom of the page, early Jewish tradition placed the creation of the world at 3761 BC. And the famous 16th century scholar, Bishop James Ussher, went so far to name the day of creation Sunday, October 23rd, 4004 BC. Okay. And then gets into a little bit about why Bishop Ussher felt that was the correct date. We don't hear a whole lot about this in conversations. We hear more the opposite. Well, when is the end of the world going to come? And all kinds of people have said all kinds of things about when the world was supposedly going to end according to what is recorded in the scriptures. But I think the important thing to remember here is that the biblical writer, whoever composed Genesis, whether you believe it was Moses himself that wrote it, or maybe it was a disciple of Moses or someone close to Moses, it's really not important whether or not you believe Moses wrote Genesis or not. The main idea that is being communicated here is that they really didn't care. Otherwise, they would have said, and details would have been provided. And it's kind of like with wrestling with the question of, well, why was humanity created? And I wrote in somebody's reflection, that's the $1 million question. If you can answer that, you need to write a book and make lots of money, because that's the question everybody wants to know the answer to. Why did God create humanity? In the simplest response to that is the biblical text doesn't explicitly say, right? We don't know exactly why, but we know once humanity was created, what the purpose of humanity was, of course, and so there's all sorts of things and directions that you can say there. But what is here? So there's difficulty dating Adam and Eve. Why is it so difficult to date ancient history? And so pages 49 through 52 address that. Also, how do genealogies function in the Old Testament? So you encounter lists and lists and lists of genealogies and recordings of clans and tribes. Just flip over a couple of books to the book of Numbers, and you'll see this. Or you open up to the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1 has a genealogy of Jesus. And so the author talks about why genealogies are significant. And I'm going to try to point you in a good direction here. Let's see. Page 50. 50 and 51 are a good pages 50 and 51 is a good place to start. Um, genealogies. Let's see here. Yeah. So there's a lot in here on concerning genealogies. But one of the things that we know, uh, compared to today, we genealogies we would expect to be detailed and specific for the purposes of tracing lineage accurately. But I think it's fair to say that that's not the case with ancient genealogies. That while yes, they do record lineages with accuracy, oftentimes they're pretty flexible with how they treat those genealogies. Just take a look, for example, at Matthew's genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. Matthew deviates from the usual patriarchs, and by identifying, just sticking with all the men in Jesus's ancestry, and then slips in there on occasion some women, right? And so there's some and they don't, and instead of listing the husbands or the men, just the women are given. And so there's something going on there. There's something more than just recording names in history. There's something theological happening there. And so it's just something to keep in the back of your mind as you think about how ancient genealogies function, because they aren't purely historical. Sometimes they are theological. Sometimes they are trying to make a point by shifting or I don't know if we'd say tweaking, but just making little adjustments, and and it drives us today. It drives a lot of people crazy because that's not how we do it today.
Mm-hmm.
According to the author, what is the function then of the flood narrative? So flood narrative is the story of Noah, and we covered some of that in the biblical reading for this week. And so pages, excuse me, on page 52, the author talks about the function then of the flood narrative as being a divider. Did I get that right? Yeah. As being a divider in the biblical text. So what is she saying there? What is it dividing? Also, why is Abraham known as the father of Jews, and when did he live? So again, here's another dating question. About what time did Abraham live? And we're talking pages 52, 53. And Abraham lived approximately year 2000 BC. So that's about when he lived. Now, why was he known as the father of Jews? So there you go. And moving right along, we're just kind of tracking here page by page. After Abraham and before Moses, the Israelites ended up living in Egypt. And so how did they end up in Egypt? This information is on page 53, but if you know the story of Joseph, then you know how the Israelites ended up in Egypt, right? There's a famine in the land, and this would be the story of Joseph. Joseph is about Genesis 37 or so to the very end of Genesis when Joseph dies, and so there's a famine in the region of Mesopotamia and in Canaan, all over the world, and in Jacob has sons, and they are shepherds, and they're out, and they come up with a plan to kill their snobby brother Joseph, who was the favorite son, of course. And instead of killing him, they concoct a plan to sell him into slavery. And then just, events happen, but Joseph ends up then in prison in Egypt. And just so happens that the Lord is with him and he's able to interpret dreams. And of course, this is extremely exciting to the Pharaoh, who has had some pretty crazy dreams. And so brings him out of jail. Joseph accurately interprets the Pharaoh's dreams. The Pharaoh rewards him by making him the second in command of all the land. And then, of course, with this famine, the brothers come and they don't recognize their brother Joseph at first. But then, of course, there's this big reveal. Joseph sends for his father and the rest of his family, and they all migrate then into the land, into the northern delta region known as Goshen in Egypt. So basically, if you know the story, you can just tell us how the Israelites end up in Egypt, or you can find the information, that you're looking for on page 53. Great story. And what major event in Israel's history then happens under Moses' leadership? So, after Joseph, we encounter then Moses I'm on pages 53 and 54. And after Joseph dies, a period of 400 years lapses, and the pharaohs after Joseph don't remember, or they don't know Joseph or his descendants, and of course they become slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And in their oppression, they cry out to God, who sends a deliverer to their rescue by the name of Moses. And so they have the 10 plagues, which have been made into all kinds of movies. And, Pharaoh, let my people go. No, I won't let them go. And over and over again, the cycle of plagues plays itself out. And then the people eventually are allowed to leave after, of course, the plague that's unleashed that kills the firstborn in all the land, and including the Pharaoh's son. And so we have this mass exodus out of the land of Egypt and into the wilderness between Egypt and the land of Canaan. And so what's this event called? This major event in Israel's history is this mass exodus. It's the parting of the sea and walking on dry land, and and wandering in the desert, eventually coming then 40 days later to Mount Sinai, where the 10 Commandments are given. And then that's a major event in Israel's history. Any questions so far?
No. Okay.
Pretty straightforward, right? We're just walking through the text, recounting these ancient stories, and now we're with question number 7. We're going to skip a little bit, but we're jumping right into the next major character. As I mentioned before, we were talking about Adam. We're talking about Noah, Moses, Abraham, Moses, and David. And so here we're just skipping ahead a little bit, and skipping to David, pages 54 and 55. And here we see that David becomes king around the year 1000 BCE. So about 1,000 years after Abraham, David takes the throne. Okay. All right. Who preceded David as the leader of Israel? So who came before David? Solomon, his son, came after him, but who was before David as the leader of Israel? And then here is a map. Yeah, questions 9, 10, and 11 correlate to this map here. We have arrow A, which is down here. Here is the Mediterranean Sea off to the side, and then this is modern day Turkey, and then and then over here is this huge region marked with the letter C, and then again here's the arrow B marking this what would be a smaller region here. So which letters correspond to which question? So which one's the land of Canaan, which one's the land of Egypt, and then which one represents Mesopotamia? The question number 9 here, before I get too far ahead, it says, describe biblical events that happened in Mesopotamia. And there are a number of options for you to choose from. And so we're talking about pages 56, 57 says Genesis tells us that Adam and Eve are placed in a garden toward the east where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates are found. So that happens in this area called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is also the setting for Noah's flood and the Tower of Babel. So there are a number of things that you could say here. All right, question number 12. After Moses, Joshua took over leadership of Israel, and Joshua led the nation to conquer Canaan. Then they divided up the land. Look at figure 2.8 on page, nope, keep going. Figure 2.8 on page 64. And then, so the question really is just, according to what did they divide up the land? So, yeah, they divided the land
tribes
according to tribe. All right. Okay. What happens in the year 931 BC during the reign of Rehoboam that directs much of the rest of Israel's history? And then it says, describe the geography of the people of God following 931 BC. Okay, so really we're pages 65 and following. David takes the throne in about the year 1000, and he reigns. And then his son Solomon succeeds him, and then we have a grandchild of David, a guy by the name of Rehoboam. What's significant about this time period is that during Solomon's leadership, the kingdom begins to fall apart, and so we see the unified kingdom of Israel become a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And 931, we see that just really the country is torn apart by a civil war. And so Israel is in the north, ruled by many different kings vying for power, and then Judah in the south is ruled by the descendants of David. Okay. Eventually, then, both the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom are conquered. What are the dates of the respective conquests? On page 67 and following, it says you'll have to do a little math. You can also find this information easily through Google, just in terms of when was the first conquest. So what happens then is there's a series of conquests, and what we see then in the year 722 BCE, Assyria sweeps through the land and takes people with them as they conquer nations and send people out, and it says that drags the population off to faraway places where they're expected then to resettle into new cities and towns. But it doesn't end there, because it will be in about the year from 722 to 587 or so. Another powerhouse comes in, and the Assyrians are conquered by the Babylonians. And I think that is leading up to our next question. The conquering of the southern kingdom of Judah resulted in a season called the Exile, where many Jews were taken away to live in Babylon. And so what happens then in 538? So, and this is on page 67 and 68.
38.
Yeah. And so in 722, 780. I got something backwards here. Sorry, folks. Yeah. About 586, they're conquered by Babylonians, but and then we see that by 738, led by actually came in three different waves, led by leaders like Ezra, Nehemiah. And you can read about Nehemiah and Ezra in their books in the Old Testament named after them. And then another Jew by the name of Zerubbabel. They return home, basically to Jerusalem. Okay, and that is that. Any questions about that worksheet? All right. Hearing none, let's move on.
Oh.
You doing okay there?
Yeah, I was trying to say my deal. It was on the other screen.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at this week's evaluation. Again, lots of time here to take this evaluation. You get a sneak peek of the questions here. All right, here we go. There's only 3 questions this week, okay? First one is, Abraham is known as a friend of God, the father of the Jews, the father of the Arabs, the second Adam, or all of the above. Each question is worth 4 points this week, by the way. Mesopotamia means the land between the hills, the land between the plains, the valleys, the rivers, or the cities. So what does Mesopotamia mean? And then finally, of the following names that describe the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, which name reflects the inhabitants prior to the Exodus? So we're talking from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River of modern day Israel and Palestine, the border. Which name best reflects who lived there pre-Exodus? So is it Israel, the Promised Land, Canaan, all of the above, or none of the above? Choose wisely. All right, just 3 questions. We'll close that out. Yep, I'm okay with that. Yep. And I scored a 0. Normal sort of a normal week here, friends. Just 2 discussion questions. The worksheet, which is your apply 1, and then followed by apply number 2, which is the reflections that you've written on a new set of texts for you to interact with. And then I will, since it's here, final paper overview. It's never too early to get a jump on thinking about what you want to do for your final paper. I will send out an email reminder to let me know what direction you think you're going to go for your final paper, just so I know what you're thinking about. And believe it or not, one time I was teaching Old Testament and somebody submitted a New Testament paper. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page and we're working in the same testament. So Old Testament, and here are some of the details, which are also found in the syllabus. It's a short paper, roughly about 1,500 words or so, which is about 3 to 4 double-spaced type pages, with at least 4 sources, but no more than 8. And we're talking about, you could talk about anything that is of interest to you in the Old Testament. Topics may include the Middle Bronze Age, which is something that we haven't discussed in detail yet, but we're getting there. So hang on just a little bit longer. Old Testament theophanies. This word theophany is a word that's not used in our vocabulary, but it describes how God is revealed in the scriptures. And so we see in the reading for this week in the book of Exodus, of course, God comes to Moses in this burning bush. And this bush is out in the desert. It's set ablaze, but it's not consumed. And that's considered a theophany. And we see theophanies all over the biblical text. And so maybe you were interested in writing about that, or maybe you're interested in writing about the relationship between the Bible and archaeology. How does archaeology substantiate, or conversely, how does archaeology challenge the claims of the Bible? And obviously you could write for many more than 3 or 4 pages, but here we're just starting to really just get a taste of it. Maybe you want to write about Babylon or Assyria, or learn more about Egypt. during the time of, say, Jacob, for example, and Joseph, or any of the prophets. One of the more interesting papers I've read in this course actually is none of these things, but just purely a student's curiosity about something that they had read in the scriptures that just really bugged them. And it's in the story of, it has to do with the story of Noah. And after the flood, right, Noah plants a vineyard. He gets really drunk, and one of his sons, a guy by the name of Ham, right, he comes across his dad laying exposed in his tent, and he goes out and he tells his brothers about it. And then his brothers get a blanket. They walk backwards, not looking at their naked dad, drunken on the floor in the tent, and they cover him up with the blanket. Well, when Noah wakes up, he doesn't. It's interesting. He's really, really upset with Ham, and so he curses Ham's son, a guy by the name of Canaan, and it's called The Curse of Canaan. And so this student wrote for 4 pages about the curse of Canaan and the research that he had done and the conclusions that he had drawn. And fascinating paper. I learned a lot from this student in this way. And so, if there's something that you're just really interested in, as long as you let me know what it is ahead of time, great. I say go for it. And in the rare instance where I have to help guide or maybe choose another topic that maybe find a little bit more research on, that does happen from time to time, but I'm here to help you do that as well. So you could write about creation or fall. You could write about Sabbath or the year of Jubilee. What a great topic for a paper like this. And here are just some other guiding elements for you at the bottom of this page, including introduction, body, conclusion, that sort of, just these sorts of typical things for a normal paper. Format is pretty standard. I already mentioned 1,500 words. This information is here.
Okay.
But here's a suggested timeline for you if you're interested. Think of this week on some ideas that you might want to include in your paper, and then starting next week, start doing your research and begin to jot down some initial thoughts. And then, of course, week 4, you can write your paper. Week 5 would be a great time for you to submit your paper to NetTutor. You obviously have the option of asking a question for 10 extra bonus points, but what a great opportunity to take advantage of NetTutor. I sat in this week on an online meeting where NetTutor representatives really walked us through their business, their model, why they do what they do and how they do it. And I really want to encourage every student in this course to submit their paper for feedback to NetTutor before submitting it to me for a grade. You won't regret it. So maybe in week 5 or early in week 6, submit your paper to NetTutor to get some feedback before submitting your final draft to me. Okay. That's what I have for you. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have one on the format.
Yes.
Do you want title page and so on and so forth, or just
yeah.
APA?
I'm not a big stickler about title pages, but I do want the reference page.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question. Thank you.
Running heads or title in the header or any of that type?
If you want to, you may. I do not require it.
Okay.
And I'll talk next week I'm going to give you an example next week of a good paper and a bad paper. One that was graded really well and one that was graded really harshly in this course. And I'll show you why next week. So be ready for that. I think it'll help you a lot too as you begin to pull sources together and do your research. So
I think that would help.
yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to upload these papers, but I'm happy to show them here in Zoom Live just to protect the identities of the students. So I'll be happy to
because
share that next week.
Sometimes it gets confusing because every teacher has a different format. So that would really help.
Is APA required for all of your courses here?
Yes, but every teacher is different. Some,
yeah.
Like you said, you don't require a title page. Some teachers like the title page, the
abstract
and abstract. Yes, every teacher is different. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can see here it's really clear the structure of the paper. There is no abstract listed here because we're not writing an if this were a seminary course or a graduate level course, I could see where that would apply. But for our purposes here, the paper structure is very, very simple. An introduction where you state your thesis or why, what you're talking about and why we're talking about it, a body, and then a conclusion with a reference page at the end. So very, very simple format.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Good. All right. Well, I'll have those examples for you next week. Any other questions before I pray?
No.
Okay. All right.
I do not.
All right. Sounds good. Well, let me pray for you. Father, thanks for this week. Thanks for these students. Thanks for what you're doing in their lives. I know like every day is full of surprises. Some days are better than others. And we all come to learn together, carrying different burdens, and just different things happen during the day that can really frustrate us and get us down. But the one thing that remains true is that you are faithful, you are good, and you have our best interest at heart. You have their best interest at heart. You are working out all things that are happening in their lives for your good. And you desire for them to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. It means day in and day out being reminded that you are good, you are faithful, you are constant, you are true, and that they can trust in you to lead them through the valleys as well as the mountaintop moments of life. And so I just pray your blessing upon them this week as they prepare their discussion posts and they prepare their worksheets and assignments and take the course evaluation, and then also even just begin to think about what their final paper topic will be. And so I just pray that you would give them wisdom and discernment to best handle that, and that you would make it clear to each and every one, and this is the direction you should go, and just go for it. And so thank you for this time. Thank you for this past hour. And we can't thank you enough for your love and your grace. Thank you for your son who, in this season of Lent, just this 40 days leading up to Resurrection Sunday and Easter, we journey with him as he set his eyes and his determination, his will to reach Jerusalem, which would be his final destination, his final trip. In this season of Lent, we just we recognize our need for you, God, to identify with us in our humanity and our sinfulness, and just to say thank you for doing something about it, for crucifying our sins on the cross. And we're so grateful for your love for us. We love you, we thank you, and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks so much, you guys. Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.